She was 19, broke, and spent her last 10 on a sinking houseboat in the Louisiana bayou. What she found hidden beneath the floor wasn't just 48,000, it was 40 years of someone else's survival, sealed in silence. The real question is, did she just get lucky or inherit a life she now has to live up to? If this story meant something to you, feel free to hit like and subscribe for more. You can also share it with someone who might need it today. I'm curious though, where are you listening from? And what time is it there right now? Drop it in the comments. She was 19 years old, and by that point, life had already taken more from her than most people her age could even imagine. Not all at once, nothing that clean or dramatic, it happened slowly, in pieces, the way things usually do. Her mother died when she was 11. One week she was there, making dinner in a quiet kitchen, reminding her to finish homework, asking about her day, and then suddenly, she wasn't. A brain aneurysm, no warning, no time to prepare, just gone, and for a while people showed up. Neighbors brought casseroles, teacher spoke softly, her father tried, he really did, but something in him never came back after that. At first it was subtle. He still went to work, still paid the bills, still showed up to school events when he had to. But he wasn't really there, not in the way that mattered. Conversations became shorter, eye contact faded. The house got quieter, not in a peaceful way, but in that heavy, hollow way where you start to feel like you reliving next to a ghost. By the time she turned 16, she had already learned something most people don't figure out until much later, that sometimes people don't leave physically, they just slowly disappear while standing right in front of you. So she adapted. She got a job, took the bus an hour each way to a marine supply store outside the city, and started building a life that didn't depend on anyone else. There was something about boats that made sense to her. They were systems. If something broke, you could trace it, understand it, fix it. Unlike people, unlike grief. She saved everything she earned, dollar by dollar, stuffing it into an old coffee can in the back of her closet. Not because she had a plan, just because saving felt like control, and control felt like survival. Then, on her 19th birthday, whatever was left of her old life finally gave out. Her father died that evening, sitting in his chair, the TV still on in the background, a heart attack, quiet, sudden, final. She found him when she got home from work. And standing there in that dim living room, she didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She just stood still for a long moment, taking it in the same way you do when something feels too big to process all at once. Because deep down, a part of her had been saying goodbye for years already. The house wasn't hers, it never was, a rental. And the landlord, polite, practical, not cruel but not sentimental either, gave her 2 weeks. That was it. 2 weeks to pack up everything that was left of her life and figure out where to go next. No family to call. No safety net waiting in the background, just a backpack, a duffel bag, and a little over $1,000 in a coffee can. On her last morning there, she stood on the porch for a while before leaving, not crying, not hesitating. Just looking, at the door, at the place that used to be something. And then she closed it, picked up her bags, and walked away. No dramatic music. No big moment. Just a quiet decision to keep moving. The bus station smelled like old coffee and worn plastic seats. People came and went, most of them knowing exactly where they were headed. She didn't, not really. But she had been thinking about Louisiana for months, something about the water, the idea of boats, the possibility of learning something real, something she could build with her hands. It wasn't a plan, it was more like a pull. The kind you don't fully understand, but you follow anyway because staying still isn't an option. So she bought the ticket, sat by the window, watched as everything familiar slowly disappeared behind her. The road stretched longer, the air grew thicker, the trees changed. And somewhere along that ride, between what she had lost and whatever was waiting ahead, something shifted. Not in a dramatic, life-changing way, just a small, quiet realization. She didn't have anything left tying her to the past. And for the first time, that didn't feel like loss. It felt like space. By the time she got off the bus in southern Louisiana, the air felt different, thicker, heavier, like it had weight to it. It clung to your skin, settled into your clothes, made everything move just a little slower. The town itself wasn't much to look at. A gas station, a few low buildings, a stretch of road that didn't seem to be in any hurry to go anywhere. But beyond it, past the last signs of anything structured or planned, there was water. Not the kind you see in postcards or vacation ads. This was darker, quieter. The kind of water that didn't try to impress you. It just existed. A man was waiting for her in a beat-up pickup truck, just like he said he would be, Daniel Hale. He looked like someone who had spent most of his life outdoors, sun-worn skin, steady eyes. The kind of presence that didn't need to say much to be understood. The drive out to his shop took them through narrow roads lined with cypress trees, their roots half submerged in still, black water. Spanish moss hanging low like something out of another time. Neither of them talked much, wasn't awkward. Just quiet in a way that didn't ask anything from you. When they finally pulled up, the place looked exactly like what it was, a working boat repair yard. Nothing polished, nothing staged. Just tools, wood, metal, and a handful of boats in various states of being taken apart and put back together. It smelled like oil, salt, and something faintly metallic. Real work lived here. And then she saw it. At the far end of the dock, slightly tilted to one side, tied loosely like it had been forgotten, was the houseboat. It wasn't impressive. In fact, most people probably wouldn't have looked at it twice. The paint was peeling, the hull was rusted through in places, and it sat low in the water like it had been slowly giving up for years. The kind of thing you assume is already done for. Daniel pointed it like it wasn't anything special. That one's been sitting there a while, he said. Guy who owned it passed. No family. Marina was gonna scrap it. She walked closer without saying anything. Each step along the dock creaked under her weight, the wood soft from years of moisture and neglect. Up close, it looked worse. The metal was eaten away along the edges, the cabin walls were warped, the windows clouded over. It should have been a bad idea. Objectively, it was a bad idea. But that wasn't what she saw. She saw the shape of it, the structure underneath the damage, the way the hull was built. Steel, not fiberglass. That meant it could be repaired, the cabin wood, replaceable. The frame was still intact. And more than that, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope exactly. Something quieter, something steadier. Like recognition. You can fix this, Daniel said, watching her closely, not pushing, just stating a fact. She didn't answer right away. She stepped onto the boat instead. The deck shifted slightly under her feet, a slow, gentle movement with the water beneath it. It wasn't stable. It wasn't safe. But it was alive in a way, not dead, not yet. Inside, it was worse than she expected. The air was thick with mildew, the mattress was rotted through, the small kitchen area was barely holding together. Everything felt used up, left behind. Like no one had cared enough to come back for it. And somehow that made it feel familiar. She stood in the middle of that small space for a long moment, turning slowly, taking it in. Most people would have seen a problem. A loss, something not worth the effort. But she had spent the last few years learning how to look at broken things differently. Systems could be fixed. Damage didn't mean the end. It just meant you had to understand what went wrong. How much, she asked finally. Daniel hesitated for a second, like he was measuring something she couldn't see. Then he shrugged. $10. That covers the back fees on the dock. $10. She had over 1,000 saved. Enough to get by for a little while. Enough to maybe rent a room somewhere, stretch it out, survive quietly. That would have been the safe choice. The logical one. But standing there in that half-rotted boat, she realized something that didn't feel logical at all. Safe wasn't going to get her anywhere. Safe would just keep her drifting. She reached into her bag, pulled out the coffee can, and counted out 10 $1 bills. Her hands didn't shake. She didn't second-guess it. She just handed it over like she had already made the decision long before this moment. Daniel took the money, looked at it, then looked back at her with something close to respect. Not surprise, not doubt. Just a quiet acknowledgement. All right, he said. Then it's yours. That was it. No paperwork. No ceremony. Just $10 and a decision that didn't look like much from the outside. But that decision changed everything. Because it wasn't really about buying a boat. It was about choosing something instead of waiting. That night, she stayed there on that boat. No proper bed, no electricity, nothing comfortable about it. Just a sleeping bag on the floor and the sound of water moving quietly against the hull. At first every noise felt unfamiliar. The creak of wood, the distant splash of something in the water, the low hum of insects outside. It should have been unsettling. But somewhere in the middle of the night, that feeling shifted. The sound stopped feeling like threats. They started feeling like presence. Like the world hadn't ended just because her old life had. Like something was still moving, still breathing, still holding space for her to exist in it. She lay there staring at the ceiling, barely visible in the dark, and for the first time in a long time, her mind wasn't racing ahead or pulling backward. It was just there. And somewhere between exhaustion and something close to peace, she realized something simple but important. She didn't need everything figured out. She just needed a place to start. The next morning came early, not because she set an alarm, but because the boat wouldn't let her sleep in. The heat built fast once the sun came up, turning the small cabin into something thick and airless. She sat up, pushed the sleeping bag aside, and for a second, she forgot where she was. Then the smell hit her: damp wood, old fabric, that faint metallic edge of rust, and it all came back. The boat, the decision, the fact that this was hers now. There's something about the first day of a big choice. It doesn't look dramatic, feels practical. Like, okay, now what? And for her, the answer was obvious. She needed to see what she was working with, not guess, not assume. Actually, no. Daniel showed up not long after with coffee and a paper bag of something warm. Didn't make a big deal out of anything. Just handed her a cup, nodded toward the boat, and said, "Start with the bilge." If you've never been on a boat like that, the bilge is basically the lowest point, where everything ends up. Water, durile, things people forget, things they don't want to deal with. It's not the part you show anyone. It's the part you avoid until you can't anymore. She found the hatch in the floor, wedged it open, and looked down. 6 inches of dark water. Still thick, the kind that doesn't reflect light so much as absorb it. She didn't hesitate. Grabbed a bucket, then the old coffee can, and started scooping. It was slow, uncomfortable work. Bent over, arms reaching down, lifting, dumping again and again. The air down there smelled worse the longer she worked, stagnant, sore. Like something had been sitting untouched for too long. Her back started to ache, her hands got slick, but she didn't stop. There's a rhythm to that kind of work. Simple, repetitive, almost meditative if you let it be. It took her close to 2 hours to get the water out. By the time she was done, the bottom of the bilge finally came into view. She leaned down with a flashlight, expecting more of the same debris, maybe rot, something that needed to be cleaned or replaced. Instead, she saw something that didn't belong there. A box. Not just any box, a wooden footlocker, the kind you'd expect to see in an old photograph or a war movie. It was sitting on a raised platform, like someone had made a point to keep it above the waterline. That alone told her something. Whoever put it there didn't forget about it. They protected it. She stared at it for a long moment before saying anything. Then she climbed out, wiped her hands on her jeans, and went to find Daniel. He followed her back without asking many questions, crouched down beside the open hatch, and shined his own light in. For a second, he didn't say anything either. Then he let out a low breath, almost like he recognized what he was looking at without needing to explain it. "That'd be his," he said finally. "Whose?" "Guy who owned the boat, Art Leblanc." He paused, then added, "Lived out here a long time." Kept to himself. There was something in the way he said it. Not mysterious, just respectful. Like the kind of person you don't reduce to a simple story. They got the box out together. It was heavier than it looked, solid in a way that made you aware of its weight immediately. They set it down on the deck, and for the first time, she really looked at it. The wood was worn but intact, the brass corners dulled with age, leather straps cracked but still holding, and in the center, a rusted padlock. Daniel handed her a hacksaw. "Your boat," he said, "your call." That moment stretched a little longer than it needed to. Not because she was scared, but because she understood instinctively that whatever was inside that box had been there a long time. Untouched, waiting. And opening it meant stepping into something that wasn't originally hers. Still, she knelt down, held the lock steady, and started cutting. The metal resisted at first, then gave way slowly, the sound sharp and uneven against the quiet of the water around them. When it finally snapped, it fell against the deck with a dull, final sound that seemed louder than it should have been. She unfastened the straps, lifted the lid. Inside were rows of small canvas bags, neatly arranged, each one tied with string, each one labeled with a year written in faded ink. The handwriting was careful, consistent, not rushed. She picked one up, had weight to it, not overwhelming but enough to feel real. She untied the string, opened it, and looked inside. Coins. Old ones, silver. The kind you don't see in circulation anymore. She poured a few into her hand, turned them over, watched how they caught the light. They weren't random. They were kept, collected, saved on purpose. She opened another bag, more coins. Another. This one had folded bills, aged but intact, another quarters, another dimes. Each one different, but all following the same pattern. Year by year, one bag at a time. She didn't say anything for a while. Neither did Daniel. They just kept opening them, one after another, the quiet rhythm of discovery replacing any need for conversation. It wasn't until they had several open that the realization really settled in. This wasn't loose change. This was a system. 40 years of it. They counted everything over the next couple of days, slowly, carefully, not rushing it. Daniel brought in someone he trusted to look at the coins, give a fair estimate. No shortcuts, no guessing. When they finally added it all up, the number didn't feel real at first. $48,200. Sitting in that box, under the floor, untouched. But the money wasn't the part that stayed with her. Not really. At the very bottom of the chest, beneath the last bag, there was something else. A folded flag and an envelope. Her name wasn't on it. No one's was. Just a simple line written across the front to whoever finds this. She opened it carefully, like it might fall apart if she wasn't gentle. The paper was thin, worn at the edges, but the writing was steady. Clear, intentional. She read it once, then again. And somewhere in the middle of those words, something shifted. Because it wasn't just a letter. It was a life condensed into a few honest sentences. A man who had come back from something he couldn't fully explain, who had found a way to keep going by building small, consistent habits. Saving a little each year, staying in one place, letting time pass without letting himself disappear completely. He didn't know who would find it. He didn't expect anything in return. He just left it there. Like a quiet hand reaching forward into a future he wouldn't be part of. She folded the letter back slowly, sat there on the edge of the boat, the water moving softly beneath her, and for the first time since she arrived, she felt something she hadn't expected. Not excitement. Not even relief. Something heavier. Responsibility. Because that box wasn't just something she found. It was something that had been trusted forward. For the first few hours after they finished counting the money, she didn't celebrate. That's the part people usually expect, right? Some kind of reaction, shock, excitement, maybe even relief. But none of that really showed up the way you'd think. Instead, she just sat there on the edge of the boat, the open foot locker beside her. The canvas bags stacked neatly like they had been for decades, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. Because it didn't feel like she had found something. It felt more like something had been handed to her without warning. And there's a difference between those two things. Finding something feels like luck. Being handed something, especially something this heavy, comes with a question attached to it, whether anyone says it out loud or not. Daniel didn't push her. He just leaned against the railing for a while, looking out over the water, then finally said, "You gonna deposit it?" Simple question. Practical. Grounded, she nodded, but even that felt bigger than it should have. Because once the money became real, once it went into a bank account, got counted, documented, it stopped being a story and started being a responsibility. The next day they drove into town. The bank wasn't anything special. Fluorescent lights, quiet counters, the kind of place where people go to handle normal things. Paychecks, bills, small savings. Not this. She walked in carrying a grocery bag filled with canvas pouches that represented 40 years of someone else's life. And for a second, she almost turned around. Not because she didn't want the money, but because she wasn't sure yet what it meant to have it. The teller looked confused at first, then called over the manager. A woman in her 50s, calm, observant, the kind of person who had seen enough to not jump to conclusions too quickly. She listened as Ellie explained, showed her the letter, let her read it. No rushing, no pressure. Just letting the situation unfold honestly. When the manager finished reading, she didn't ask a bunch of questions. She just handed the letter back and said quietly, "You take care of what he left you." That sentence stayed with her. Not spend it wisely, not you were lucky. Just take care of it. Like it was something alive. Something that could be mishandled if she wasn't paying attention. And that's when the real conflict started, not external, internal, because suddenly, she had options. And options can be more overwhelming than having nothing at all. She could have walked away from the boat, found a small apartment somewhere, taken time off, lived comfortably for a while without worrying about anything. No one would have blamed her. Most people probably would have done exactly that. But every time she tried to imagine that version of her life, it didn't sit right. It felt disconnected. Like skipping a step that actually mattered. Because the truth was, the money didn't show up in her life randomly. It showed up in a very specific place. On that boat in that water. In the middle of something she had already started. and ignoring that felt like missing the point entirely. There were other pressures too, even if they were subtle. Word travels in small communities, whether people mean for it to or not. A few people heard about what she found. Nothing dramatic, no accusations, but there were looks. Questions that weren't always asked directly. What's she gonna do with it? Is that really hers? Not hostile. Just curious in a way that made you aware that your choices were being noticed. She thought about that more than she expected. Not because she felt judged, but because it forced her to ask herself something honestly. What did she believe was right? Not convenient. Not easy. Right? So she went back to the boat. Sat in that same small space, the one that still smelled faintly of mildew and old wood, and looked around. At the walls that needed replacing. The wiring that needed to be redone. The hole that needed serious work. It wasn't a mystery what needed to happen next. The boat had been telling her from the beginning. She didn't make a big announcement, didn't draw a line in the sand. She just started working. The money didn't disappear overnight. It didn't turn into anything flashy. It moved slowly, deliberately into the exact things that made sense. Materials, tools, parts. Things she actually needed to rebuild what she had already committed to. She kept track of it carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect. Every dollar felt connected to something that had taken time to build, so she treated it the same way. She kept living simply. Still slept on the boat while it was half finished. Still worked alongside Daniel, learning everything she could. She didn't separate herself from the process just because she had the means to. If anything, she leaned into it more, because the work itself mattered now in a different way. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about proving to herself more than anyone she could take something real and build something meaningful out of it. There were moments, of course, where doubt crept in. Late at night, when everything was quiet again, when the sounds of the water came back and her mind had space to wander. She'd think about how easily things could have gone differently. How someone else might have found that box. How she could have made different choices, easier ones. And in those moments the weight of it all would settle in again. But it never turned into regret. Because each day she kept showing up, kept working, kept making decisions that aligned with something deeper than just comfort. That weight started to shift. It stopped feeling like pressure, and started feeling like direction. She wasn't just using the money. She was answering it. By the time the boat was finally finished, it didn't happen all at once. There wasn't a single moment where she stepped back and said, "It's done." It came together the same way everything else in her life had up to that point, slowly, piece by piece. Through days that didn't feel important on their own, but added up to something solid over time. The hull was sealed and repainted deep blue, almost black in certain light. The cabin had been rebuilt from the inside out, clean wood, new wiring. Small details that most people wouldn't notice, but that she knew were right because she had done them herself. Every inch of that boat had passed through her hands at some point. And that mattered more than the final result. People in the area started to notice, not in a loud way. Just in that quiet shift that happens when someone stops being the new person and becomes part of the background. Fishermen would nod when they passed by. Someone would stop to ask a question about an engine. A man she'd seen a few times before asked if she could take a look at his outboard motor. Said he'd heard she knew what she was doing. Word spreads differently in places like that. It's not about advertising. It's about consistency. Showing up, doing the work, not making a big deal out of yourself. She fit into that rhythm without trying to. She started spending more time at the repair shop, not just learning, but contributing. Fixing things on her own, taking on small jobs. Earning money again, not because she needed it immediately, but because it felt right to keep building something that didn't rely on what she had found. The money from the Foot Locker was still there, mostly untouched except for what had gone into the boat. And she didn't rush to change that. It sat in the background, like a quiet safety net, but not something she leaned on. The boat itself became something more than just a place to stay. It wasn't perfect. It still creaked sometimes when the water shifted. The air inside still carried a faint trace of the past if the humidity got high enough. But it felt steady, not temporary, not borrowed. Hers. She knew how every system worked, where every wire ran, how to fix anything that might go wrong. That kind of knowledge changes the way you exist in a space. It stops being something you depend on and becomes something you understand. Evenings were her favorite time. After a full day of work, when the heat started to break and the lights softened. She'd sit on the edge of the deck and just watch the water. It didn't move fast, it didn't need to. Sometimes a bird would pass low over the surface, or something would ripple beneath it, barely visible. Nothing dramatic, just life continuing at its own pace. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was chasing anything. She wasn't trying to catch up to a version of herself she had lost. She wasn't trying to outrun anything either. She was just there. She thought about the past sometimes. About her mother, about the way she used to keep those drawings of boats, like she had seen something early on that no one else had. About her father, and how grief had hollowed him out slowly, how she had watched it happen without understanding it at the time. And about the man who had lived on this boat before her. A life she never saw, but somehow stepped into pieces of. None of it felt separate anymore. It all connected in a way that didn't need to be explained out loud. One evening she pulled out the letter again. She didn't read it every day, but when she did, it hit a little differently each time. Not because the words changed, but because she did. At first, it had felt like something left behind. Now it felt more like something still in motion, like the story hadn't ended with him. It had just continued, in a different form. That realization didn't come with a big emotional moment. No sudden clarity, no dramatic shift. Just a quiet understanding that settled in over time. The kind that doesn't demand attention, but changes the way you see things anyway. She wasn't lost anymore, not because she had found a perfect place or built a perfect life, but because she had chosen something and stayed with it long enough for it to become real. That's what most people miss. They think finding your place is about discovering something out there waiting for you. But more often than not, it's something you build slowly, imperfectly, until one day you look around and realize you were not searching anymore. The boat rocked gently beneath her as the light faded, the water reflecting the last colors of the sky. Somewhere in the distance, someone's radio played softly, just loud enough to carry across the surface. She leaned back slightly, resting her hands against the wood she had rebuilt herself, and let the moment sit without trying to turn it into anything more. She had started with $10 and a decision that didn't make sense to anyone but her. And now, without forcing it, without rushing it, she had something that felt like a beginning. And maybe that's the thing about second chances, they don't always look like a fresh start. Sometimes they look like something broken, something forgotten, something no one else wanted. She thought she bought a dying boat for 10. But what she really found was a life someone else had spent 40 years learning how to live. And in the end, it wasn't the money that changed everything. It was the choice to stay and build something worth keeping. What stayed with me after this story wasn't really the money. I know that's the part people remember, the 48,000, the hidden box. The idea that something life-changing can just appear when you least expect it. And sure, that's satisfying. It gives you that feeling that maybe life can surprise you in a good way. But if you sit with it a little longer, you start to realize the money wasn't the point. It never really was. Because the truth is, Ellie could have taken that money and disappeared into an easier life. No one would have blamed her. After everything she went through, she had every reason to choose comfort, to choose the path that asked the least from her. But she didn't, and that's the part I think matters. She stayed. She chose to build something instead of escape. She chose to take responsibility for something she didn't earn, but somehow understood she needed to honor. And I think that says something really important about how life works, because most of the time, what changes us isn't what we re-given. It's what we decide to do with it. Not everyone is going to find a hidden box of money. That's not realistic. But everyone at some point is going to be handed something unexpected. A situation, an opportunity, even a loss. Something that forces you to decide who you are going to be next. And in those moments, it's really easy to look for the fastest way out, the most comfortable option. The version of life that requires the least effort. But this story reminds you that there's another way to respond. You can stay. You can learn. You can build. Even if it's slow, even if it's messy, even if no one's watching. Because in the end, what she built wasn't just a boat or a place to live. She built a sense of belonging. And that's something a lot of people spend their whole lives chasing without ever quite finding. So maybe the real takeaway is this: your life doesn't change in one big moment. It changes in the decisions you make after that moment. The quiet ones, the ones no one claps for. The ones where you choose to keep going, to take care of what's been placed in your hands, and to turn it into something meaningful. And if you can do that, then maybe you don't need luck at all.